The Keurig on the credenza had been brewing the same dark roast for 3 years, and I could tell the time by the smell alone. 7:14 a.m. meant the first pot was done. 7:14 meant Sebastien Vance would be through the glass doors in exactly 11 minutes, and his flat white needed to be waiting on the left side of his desk. Always the left, never the right, because the right side was for the Mont Blanc pen and the leather folio he'd carried since before I started working here. I'd been keeping count without meaning to. 843 mornings. That's how many times I'd pulled on my coat at 6:30, taken the 401 bus from my apartment in Westboro to the Vance Capital offices on Sparks Street, and settled into the particular rhythm of working for a man whose name appeared on the building directory in letters 3 inches tall. My desk sat in the anteroom outside his corner office on the 14th floor. Close enough to hear everything, invisible enough to hear things I was never meant to. That was the job. That was what I'd mastered. The calibration of presence. Useful without being obtrusive. Efficient without being memorable. His EA, his gatekeeper, his problem solver. Isadora Chen, 31 years old, with a commuter pass, a very good memory, and the specific skill of anticipating what a person needed before they'd finished the thought. Isadora. His voice came through the intercom at 7:31, 1 minute after he'd settled in. That particular cadence, measured, deliberate, the kind of voice that assumed it would always be answered, meant he'd already reviewed his morning briefing and found something he wanted to discuss. The Hartwell file. Where are we on the regulatory sign-off? I pressed the intercom button. Approved Tuesday. The confirmation copy is in your red folder, 3rd tab. I flagged the clause about the disclosure window because it conflicts with the OSC guidance you referenced last month. A pause. You flagged it before I asked. You were going to ask, Mr. Vance. Another pause. Longer this time. Something that might have been the beginning of amusement, pressed flat before it could fully form. Come in. I gathered the Hartwell notes and his updated agenda and smoothed the front of my charcoal trousers. Professional, practical, with pockets, which I considered a non-negotiable, before pushing open the heavy walnut door. His office always felt slightly colder than the rest of the floor. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Ottawa River pulled the light in a way that made everything feel more exposed than comfortable. Sebastien stood at the window with his back to me, which I'd learned was his thinking posture. Dark jacket, dark slacks, that particular stillness he had when he was running numbers in his head. The disclosure window, he said without turning. Walk me through your concern. This was a test. He did this. Questioned conclusions I'd already reached correctly to see if I'd defend them or second-guess myself. I'd stopped second-guessing around month 4. The clause assumes a 45-day review period, but the OSC's updated guidance from February reduces that to 30 days for any fund with assets above the threshold Hartwell crossed in Q3. If we don't revise it before filing, we're looking at a compliance gap. Best case, it delays the approval 6 weeks. Worst case, it triggers a secondary review. He turned from the window. His eyes were a particular shade of gray that made it difficult to tell, sometimes, what he was actually thinking. Junior analysts had described those eyes in hushed tones in the break room. I'd simply learned to hold eye contact without flinching. It had taken a while. You've already drafted the revision. It's in the same tab, behind the flag. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Maybe the beginning of something else, but that was the kind of thought I didn't let myself finish. Good. Have Hartwell's counsel review it and get it back to me by end of day. I turned to leave. His voice stopped me. The arrangement that arrived this morning. He said it, carefully, the way he said things he was choosing not to say directly. The building concierge logged it to your name. I hadn't ordered anything. Wasn't expecting anything. My hand tightened slightly on the folder. I wasn't expecting a delivery, Mr. Vance, regardless. It's at the front desk. Eucalyptus, apparently. Quite a substantial arrangement. He paused. Someone's made an effort. The neutrality in his voice was the kind that carried weight precisely because it was trying not to. If so, they have me confused with someone else. I don't have that kind of someone. Everyone has that kind of someone, eventually, Isadora. Some are simply more patient than others. I didn't have an answer for that, so I left and returned to my desk, where the Hartwell revision suddenly seemed less interesting, then the question of who would send me flowers at work. The morning moved the way mornings did. 3 calls, a stack of correspondence to sort, a small crisis involving a scheduling conflict with the Calgary portfolio team that I resolved with 2 emails and a very precise phone call. It was nearly noon when Preeti from compliance appeared at my desk with barely contained energy. "Did you see what's sitting at reception? The whole lobby smells like a spa. I saw the log. There's a card." She lowered her voice. "It just says for the one who notices everything, no name." I minimized the spreadsheet I'd been working on. Probably misdirected, or maybe not. She glanced toward Sebastian's office with significant eyes. "You know he walked past the front desk twice this morning without a single meeting reason to be on the ground floor. He has meetings on the ground floor all the time. Isadora." He took the elevator down, looked at the arrangement, then came back up. I watched from the second-floor landing. "Preeti, I'm just saying. Don't just say." But after she left, I couldn't stop thinking about eucalyptus, about the word patient, about the fact that Sebastian Vance had mentioned the flowers without being asked, and then watched carefully to see what I did with that information. The afternoon developed its own particular tension. Sebastian called me into his office twice for things that could have been handled by email. Both times I felt his attention tracking differently than usual, not the assessment of someone reviewing the work, but something more careful, more personal. At 4:30, Kenji, the head of building security, appeared at my desk. "Miss Chen, Mr. Vance has asked that you take the arrangement home with you this evening. He'd like it cleared from reception." "That seems unnecessary. It's fine where it is." Kenji's expression didn't move. He was specific. Something in his tone made it clear this was not a suggestion. I nodded once and went back to the Hartwell timeline, but I couldn't stop turning the instruction over. He wants them moved. He'd gone downstairs to look at them. He'd told me about them before I'd known, and now he wanted them gone from the building. At 5:50, I went downstairs. The arrangement was already by the security desk. Eucalyptus branches and white ranunculus in a heavy glass vase, the kind of thing that cost real money and had been chosen carefully, not grabbed off a grocery shelf. Sebastian stepped out of the east elevator as I crossed the lobby. He walked directly to the arrangement, his face composed into that unreadable stillness, and spoke quietly to Kenji. "Take it out!" Kenji reached for it, with respect. The words came out before I'd decided to speak. Sebastian turned, and I held my ground with my heart going considerably faster than I would have preferred. "They're addressed to me. If anyone's deciding what happens to them, it should be me." The look he gave me was unlike anything I'd seen from him in 843 mornings. Not professional assessment, not the careful appreciation of competent work. Something underneath all of that, barely controlled. "You want to keep flowers from a stranger. I want to make my own decisions about what I keep or discard." I took one step forward, aware of the 2 security staff, and the woman at the front desk, watching with unconcealed interest. "And I'd like to understand why it matters to you." The silence stretched across the marble floor. Sebastian closed the distance between us until I had to look up to hold his gaze. When he spoke, his voice dropped below the register of the lobby. "You work for me. Your safety is my responsibility. I don't accept unvetted contact directed at people under my care, and I don't appreciate someone making a move on my—" He stopped, his jaw tightened. "On someone in my office without going through appropriate channels. This isn't about channels." The words came out steadier than I felt. "This is about something else." For one moment, I thought he might actually say it. I thought the thing carefully contained behind those gray eyes might break the surface. Instead, he stepped back. "Kenji, have the arrangement sent to Ms. Chen's address and run a background check on the sender. I want to know who's been contacting my staff without notification." He walked away, his footsteps measured on the marble, and I stood in the middle of the lobby, with 3 witnesses, and a vase of eucalyptus and the distinct sense that everything was different now, even if neither of us had said so. In the car on the way home. The company car, a standing arrangement I'd stopped arguing about 6 months ago. The flowers sat on the seat beside me and filled the back with their clean, sharp smell. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in Hintonburg, small and quietly comfortable, and the vase looked strange on my kitchen table. Too deliberate, too knowing. I found the card tucked into the stems. For the one who notices everything, I've been paying attention, too. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hope the eucalyptus arrived safely. I chose it deliberately. It seemed more like you than roses. I'd like to meet. Saturday, dinner. I'll make a reservation somewhere appropriate. Then, a few minutes later, I've admired your precision for some time. It seemed right to finally introduce myself properly. I set the phone down. Read the messages again. I've been paying attention. Present tense, extended. This wasn't someone I'd exchange numbers with at a networking event. This was calculated. Someone who knew my name, my workplace, my taste. My phone rang. Sebastian's direct line. Did you receive any other contact? Not a question. His voice was tight in a way I hadn't heard before. Text messages, signed with a T, saying he's been watching me, forward everything. Don't respond, don't delete anything. A pause. Are your doors locked? I'm on the 3rd floor, mister. Vance, I didn't ask about the floor. Are your doors locked? I went and checked, they were. Yes, I'm sending Kenji. That's not necessary. It is do as I say. He hung up. I forwarded the messages and stood in my kitchen with the eucalyptus and the particular cold feeling of understanding that what I'd assumed was strange flattery was actually something else. Someone had been building up to this. The flowers, the card, the texts. A sequence, not a gesture. Patient, like Sebastian had said, but not in the way he'd meant. He called again at 7:15. Don't come in tomorrow. I stared at the message for a long moment. I'll be there at 7:14, I typed back. Like always, his response was immediate. Isadora, for once in your life, don't be so bloody stubborn. I almost smiled, despite the cold knot in my stomach. Not a chance, Mr. Vance. See you tomorrow. I arrived at 7:14. The lobby had 3 more security staff than usual, positioned like they were there decoratively but weren't. Kenji met me at the door. Mr. Vance is upstairs, conference room C. He's been there since 6. Conference room C was the one with the soundproofing and the electronic shielding, the room I'd been in exactly twice in 3 years, both times to deliver documents that couldn't be emailed. The room for conversations didn't exist after they happened. Sebastian was standing at the window when I entered. I closed the door behind me, and the quiet that dropped over the room felt different from regular quiet. The flowers were sent by Theodore Ashworth. He turned, and I could see from the shadows under his eyes that he hadn't slept. Does that name mean anything to you? No. His family runs a private equity firm out of Vancouver, Ashworth Capital. They operate across Western Canada, legitimate enough on paper, but there are layers. He moved to the table where a folder sat open. Photographs, financial documents, what looked like surveillance reports. His father, Gordon Ashworth, and I were in competition for the same acquisition 3 years ago. It became unfriendly. Theodore is sending me flowers because of a deal that went sideways. Theodore has been present at your coffee shop on Tuesday mornings for the past 4 months. His voice was flat. He's attended the same indoor cycling studio as you on Wednesday evenings. He was at the Byward Market on 2 Saturdays when you were there with Preethi. Ice moved through me slowly. How do you know all of this? Because I've been watching him watch you. He said it without apology, the same way he said everything. Since November, when he showed up at a gala where you were managing the registration desk for the Queensway Charity Foundation. He asked about you, more than the situation required. I gripped the back of the nearest chair. You've had someone following me. I've had someone monitoring a potential threat to a member of my team. That's a distinction that suits you. He met my eyes directly. Yes, it is. I sat down, processed, tried to arrange what I knew into something logical. Why would he target me specifically? Because you process everything that crosses my desk. Sebastian moved around the table, not sitting, just standing at a different angle. Closer. You've managed acquisition files, restructuring documents, correspondence with regulatory bodies. You know the shape of my operations better than most of my senior partners. Theodore doesn't think you're just an assistant. He thinks you're an access point. A pause. And I need to know if he's right. The accusation landed before I was ready for it. I haven't told him anything. I've never spoken to him. I didn't know his name until 30 seconds ago. Sebastian studied me with that long, careful look I'd seen him use on financial documents he wasn't sure he trusted yet. I held his gaze and let him look. I believe you, he said finally. But he doesn't know that I know about him yet. which means he'll try again. Then I tell him I'm not interested and we close it. He'll pivot, try another approach. Sebastian opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. Theodore at a coffee shop I recognized. Theodore on a street 2 blocks from my gym. Theodore outside my building, from what looked like across the road. He's methodical. Telling him no just means he recalibrates. I looked at the photographs for a long moment. So what are you proposing? You respond to his dinner invitation. He said it quietly, with appropriate precautions. Kenji's team nearby. You wired. You meet him. You let him believe his approach is working. And we find out exactly what he's after and how far the Ashworth family is willing to go. I stared at him. You want me to gather intelligence on him. I want you to help me close a threat to this firm. And to you. He moved around the table and stopped on the same side as me, close enough that I could read the tension across his shoulders. You've been part of Vance Capital for 3 years, Isadora. You know things. The shape of our deals, our regulatory history, the names of people who've helped us navigate difficult moments. Theodore knows that. He's banking on it. And if I refuse, then I find another way to handle it. He said simply, not cruelly. But that way is slower and less clean, and it likely means people get hurt who didn't need to be. I thought about the photographs, the coffee shop, my gym, my building. I thought about the phrase I've been paying attention and what it actually meant. If I do this, I said, I have conditions. Something moved in his expression. Almost surprise. Go on. You tell me everything, not the edited version, not what you think I need to know, everything relevant. I straightened in my chair. And when this is finished, we have a real conversation. About this, I gestured between us, which was either brave or ridiculous, possibly both. About whatever it is you've been not saying for 3 years. The silence was very long. Agreed, he said finally. Both. The next 3 days were unlike any 3 days I'd had in this job or any other. Kenji walked me through the basics of wearing a wire, how to position myself in a room so the audio was clean, what signals to use if I felt unsafe. Sebastian's head of research briefed me on the Ashworth family's history, the competing acquisition, the board disputes, the specific deal that had fractured the relationship between Sebastian and Gordon Ashworth 3 years ago. Sebastian himself watched all of this with barely contained restraint, interrupting constantly with additional scenarios, alternative reads, extra contingency plans. On the second evening, after everyone else had left the floor, he found me in the conference room going through the research notes. You don't have to do this, he said from the doorway. I want to be clear about that. I know. I'm asking you to walk into dinner with someone who wants to use you. That's not a small thing. No, I agreed. But the alternative is you making this problem disappear in a way that creates a different problem. I've worked with you long enough to know what I'm not supposed to ask about. He was quiet for a moment. Then he walked in and closed the door. I've never put you in harm's way deliberately. I know that too. Stopped across the table from me, his hands flat on the surface, that thinking posture. If at any point Saturday feels wrong, I'll signal Kenji, before you think it's necessary, not after. Understood. He looked at me for a long moment. Something working itself toward the surface that he wasn't quite ready to let arrive. Why are you this calm about it? I'm not calm. I'm practical. I closed the research folder. There's a difference. You of all people should understand that. A sound that might have been a quiet laugh pressed flat. I do. He sat down across from me, which he almost never did, sat in a way that wasn't about a meeting or a task. Can I ask you something? You're going to regardless. How long have you known? He paused. About the fact that this was more than professional. On my end, I considered that question honestly. Month 4, I said. When you came in on a Saturday in February with coffee for both of us, and you'd remembered that I take oat milk, not cream, even though I'd only mentioned it once and it was in passing. He was quiet. And then you kept not doing anything about it, I said, which I eventually understood was its own kind of answer. It wasn't the answer I wanted to give. His voice was careful. It was the answer that kept you safe and kept this clean. I know. I looked at him across the table. I'm not asking you to apologize for it. I'm saying that whatever comes next, I already know what I'm choosing. Saturday arrived in the way that significant days sometimes do. Too quickly, and after a week that lasted forever. The restaurant Theodore had chosen, was in the glebe, a quiet stretch of Bank Street with dark wood and the kind of wine list that signaled old money trying to appear understated. He stood when I arrived, and I took stock of him quickly. Tall, comfortable in his suit, the particular ease of someone who'd grown up never worrying about the bill. Isadora. He took my hand with a warmth that felt practiced. Thank you for coming. I wasn't entirely sure you would. The eucalyptus was a good choice, I said honestly. It made me curious. He smiled. It was a good smile, studied but effective. I thought roses were too obvious for someone like you. Someone like me? Precise. Observant. Not interested in gestures for their own sake. He'd done his homework. I gave him that. We ordered, we talked. He was intelligent, attentive, and very good at making his questions sound like conversation. I watched him work his way toward the point, the same way I'd watched Sebastian navigate difficult meetings. Systematic, patient, with the real question always held in reserve until the groundwork was laid. You've been with Vance Capital a long time, he said eventually, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course. 3 years is significant tenure for someone in your role. The work is interesting. Sebastian Vance is a complicated figure. He said it carefully. I imagine being close to his operations gives you a particular perspective on that. He's demanding, I said. Fair, in his way fair. He turned the word over. His version of fair is somewhat contingent on whether you're useful to him, I'd imagine. Do you feel valued? Properly? The question was so precisely calibrated to hit a nerve that I felt a flicker of genuine irritation, which I put immediately away. He pays well, I said, neutral, giving nothing. There are other kinds of compensation. He held my gaze. Recognition, appreciation. Being treated as something more than a very efficient resource. He let a pause develop. I'm asking because I've been watching you for several months, and I've found myself wondering what it would look like if someone actually saw what you were worth, fully. I looked at him over the rim of my water glass. That's a very elaborate way to ask if I'm unhappy in my job. A surprised flicker. He was recalibrating. You're more direct than I expected. Then let's both be direct. I set the glass down. You've been at the same coffee shop as me every Tuesday for 4 months. You've been at my cycling studio on Wednesdays. You've been outside my building. His expression sharpened almost imperceptibly. You sent me flowers at work because you wanted me to know you knew where I was, and this dinner isn't about me. So what do you actually want, Theodore? The table went very quiet. He looked at me for a long moment. Then something shifted, the charm receding, something more genuine and considerably less comfortable taking its place. You're right, he said. It's not just about you. Tell me. He set down his fork. Your employer cost my father $17 million in the Blackridge acquisition 3 years ago. He used information shared in good faith during our early negotiations to outmaneuver us with the Toronto board before we could finalize our position. That acquisition was the cornerstone of our Western expansion strategy. Losing it, he paused. My father spent 2 years rebuilding from that. It nearly broke the firm. I processed this carefully. And you think I have information that helps you? What? Understand him? Build a case? I think you have insight into how Vance Capital operates. The acquisition strategy, the regulatory approach, the partners who facilitate the less visible aspects of deals. He looked at me steadily. My interest in you began as strategic. I won't pretend otherwise. But I want you to know that I also... He stopped. Don't, I said. Don't add a personal angle to make the ask softer. It doesn't need it. He blinked. Then he nodded, slowly, with what looked like genuine respect. Fair enough. He reached into his jacket and set a business card on the table. I'm prepared to compensate you for whatever you feel you can share. Details of upcoming acquisitions Vance is pursuing. Regulatory contacts. The structure of deals in progress. He named a number. Paid to an account of your choice. No trail back to you. There it was. Clean, explicit, fully on the record. I picked up the card, looked at it, set it face down on the table. I need to think about it, I said. His expression eased. He thought I was considering it. Take the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Neither am I said. The debrief happened in the company car on the way home. Kenji driving, Sebastian's voice in my earpiece sharp with something I couldn't name. You were perfect. He made the offer explicitly. It's all on record. I heard every word, a pause. Are you all right? I'm fine. Annoyed, but fine. I watched the city move past the window. He's smarter than he seemed at first. Adjusted his approach quickly when I pushed back, which means he'll be careful in the next contact. There'll be a next contact. He thinks I'm genuinely considering it. I paused. Sebastian, what he said about the Blackridge acquisition, is it true? Silence on the line. Some of it, he said finally. I'll explain everything. I promised you that. Tonight. His apartment was in Centertown, top floor of a building on Elgin Street, and it looked like him. Clean-lined and considered, expensive without announcing itself. Books stacked in a way that suggested actual reading. A framed photograph of a woman with his coloring, who had to be his mother. A chess set on the side table with a game in progress. He poured 2 glasses of scotch without asking if I wanted one, which was either presumptuous or accurate. It was accurate. The Blackridge deal, I said. He stood at the window with his back to me, which was his thinking posture, and I'd stopped being surprised by it. Gordon Ashworth's firm was running parallel strategies. A legitimate acquisition push through the Toronto board, and a separate set of incentives being offered to 2 of Blackridge's board members directly. Personal incentives. Off the books. Bribes. Legal gray area in terms of Canadian securities law. Unambiguously wrong in terms of what it does to markets. He turned. I discovered it during early-stage negotiations. Gordon was willing to let me in on the arrangement if I partnered with him. Share the acquisition, share the strategy. You refused. I went to the OSC. He said it plainly. I reported what I knew. The board members were investigated. The side arrangement collapsed. Without it, Gordon couldn't close the deal, and we secured Blackridge on our own. He paused. I cost him the deal and the credibility of his acquisition team at the same time. He's never forgiven it. I held my glass and thought about this. You're telling me you tanked a competitor's deal by reporting illegal activity to securities regulators? Yes. And Theodore's version of this story is that you sabotaged his family using confidential information. It's not an unreasonable read if you don't know the part about the bribery, which Theodore may not, or may know and choose not to acknowledge. He met my eyes. I'm not clean in every dimension, Isadora. I operate in a world where clean isn't always the available option. But I didn't build this firm by buying board members, and I wasn't going to partner with someone who did. I thought about the comment I'd read once in someone's notes on Vance Capital. Too principled to be fully trusted, too smart to be fully opposed. At the time, I hadn't understood it. I thought I understood it now. So what happens next? I said. You contact Theodore. Tell him you've thought about it. Tell him you're conflicted but leaning toward yes. We arrange a second meeting somewhere I control. There are 2 properties where I can guarantee clean surveillance, and we let him make his offer formally, on record, for the second time. He moved from the window. Then we take everything to the OSC and to the RCMP's commercial crime unit. Attempted corporate espionage. Solicitation of breach of fiduciary duty. He's young and he's angry, and he's done this poorly enough that we have more than we need. You're not going to deal with it the other way. He looked at me steadily. What other way? The way people in your position sometimes deal with things. I held his gaze. I've worked with you for 3 years, Sebastian. I've processed documents I've learned not to ask about. I'm not naive about the edges of how this works. He was quiet for a moment. Theodore Ashworth is 28 years old and he's doing what his father asked him to do. His father was wrong, and his approach here is wrong, but the answer is consequences through proper channels, not something else. A pause. I have lines I don't cross. They're not the same lines everyone has, but they exist and they hold. He paused. My mother made me promise her something similar when I was younger than Theodore is now and heading somewhere she didn't want me to go. I set down my glass. Tell me. So he did. He told me about a family business that operated in ways that made him ashamed before he was old enough to drive, about a mother who saw something in him, worth redirecting, and spent years making sure he went somewhere else instead, about building Vance Capital specifically as an answer to the question of what he was going to be, now that he'd decided what he wasn't. I'm not good in the uncomplicated sense, he said at the end of it. I'm better than where I came from. I'm trying to be better than that still. But there are things in my history that would give you pause if you knew all of them. You've just told me most of them. Not quite all. Then tell me the rest. After. He looked at me. After we finish this, I said. After Theodore is handled. You tell me all of it, and I decide what I think with the whole picture. That's how this works if it's going to work. He crossed the space between us slowly and stopped close enough that I could see the precise moment something shifted in his expression. The careful professional control giving way to something older and less managed. You make me want to be the version of this I promised her I could be, he said very quietly. That's not a small thing. No, I agreed. He kissed me then, or I kissed him. I'm still not entirely sure. It was one of those moments where the distinction collapses, because it was simply both of us at the same time, finally doing the thing we'd been not doing for nearly 3 years. And when we stopped, his forehead dropped to mine, and neither of us moved for a moment. This complicates things, he said. It clarifies things, a breath of a laugh. Semantics accuracy. I pulled back enough to look at him. We finish this. And then you stop using professional distance as a protection strategy, and I stop pretending not to notice when you take the elevator to the ground floor twice in one morning for no good reason. He was quiet for a moment. You noticed that. I notice everything. It's literally my job. He kissed me again. Slower this time. Deliberate. When he pulled back, his expression had shifted back towards strategic, but warmer now, the way a room changes when someone finally opens a window. The second meeting with Theodore, he said. There's an event next Thursday. Art exhibition at the Karshmassen Gallery. Invitation only, but I can arrange your name on the list. Neutral ground, very public, lots of witnesses. And you'll be there. I'll be there. His hand found mine, not lurking, openly. The gallery event was a Wednesday, not Thursday because the Thursday slot got moved. Minor logistics, but the principle held. I wore a dark green dress that Sébastien had sent to the office that morning with a note that said, simply, he should understand what he's up against, which I chose to interpret as a compliment. Theodore saw us arrive together, and his expression did something complicated and rapid before settling back into smooth neutrality. He was good, but he'd been thrown off his calculation, and thrown-off calculations have a way of showing. Isadora. He kissed my cheek, which I permitted. What a surprise. He looked at Sébastien with the specific flatness of someone pretending to be civil to a person they genuinely dislike. Vance? Ashworth. Sébastien's voice was pleasant, the way a cold morning is pleasant. I believe our fathers attempted a deal once. Unfortunate that it didn't come together. Yes, Theodore said. Unfortunate. Though I've always found that things that fall apart tend to do so for a reason. Sébastien's hand rested at the small of my back, that nearly invisible signal that anyone who knew how to read him would understand immediately. Sometimes you discover the foundation was compromised before the deal was ever real. Theodore looked at me. Something calculating sharpened behind his eyes. I hope we can still find time for that conversation, he said. The one we were having. I'll be in touch, I said. He left 20 minutes later. Sébastien watched him go. He knows something's shifted, Sébastien said quietly. Yes, which means he'll move faster. I turned to face him. Good, faster means less careful. The package arrived 4 days later. At my apartment, no return address, the handwriting matching the flowers card. A USB drive and a note. Proof that Vance isn't who you think he is. The full story of Blackridge. Call me when you've seen it. I called Sébastien immediately. Don't plug it in. His voice was sharp. Don't touch the drive with anything connected to a network. Kenji will be there in 15 minutes. 20 minutes later, I was in a car, drive in an evidence bag, being taken to a secondary location. Not his apartment, a firm property in Hindenburg that Sébastien used for meetings that needed to stay off the main office grid. Sébastien was already there. He looked at me first, before he looked at the bag. That order of priorities registered somewhere in the middle of my chest. The drive, when analyzed on an isolated machine by his head of IT security, contained a curated selection of documents from the Blackridge period. Real documents, selectively arranged to make Sébastien look like the aggressor, with the bribery context stripped out, designed to look like evidence, actually a presentation. He's not trying to expose you, I said, going through the analysis. He's trying to make me believe I have leverage. Something I could use to justify cooperating with him? Correct. Sébastien stood behind me, close enough that I could feel the tension in him. He thinks the emotional argument is more persuasive than the financial one. He's trying to make you angry at me. He doesn't know that you've already told me the whole story. No, he doesn't. A pause. Are you angry at me? For the Blackridge deal, now that you've seen it laid out this way. I considered this honestly. No. I think you made a defensible choice, and it cost someone who was doing something wrong. I'd rather know that about you than not. I turned. I'm angry that he's been outside my building. So am I. His voice went flat in a way that meant he was containing something. Don't, I said. I'm not planning anything. Good. Because we're going to do this the right way. I looked at him steadily. You call Theodore. You tell him I've reached out to you, alarmed by the package, and that you want a meeting. All three of us, neutral ground, to discuss the Blackridge situation directly. He'll think he's won. He'll think I've confronted you with his information and you're rattled. And the meeting will be your restaurant on Rideau Street, the private room, every inch wired. I paused. I'll let him make his offer, explicitly, formally. With you as a witness in the next room. Sebastian looked at me. It's cleaner than another dinner, I said. He'll be overconfident. Overconfident people make explicit statements. This is your plan? Yes, it's a good plan. He said it with something that might have been pride, which felt slightly embarrassing and also exactly right. But Isadora, I know. If anything feels wrong, I signal. Before you think it's necessary. I'll be in a restaurant on Rideau Street with you 10 feet away. The risk profile is manageable. He pulled me into an embrace then, sudden and tight. His arms around me in that way that was both protective and something beyond protection. The way you hold something you're afraid of losing. After this, he said against my hair, we go away. Weekend somewhere quiet, just us, no files, no surveillance, no contingency plans. Prince Edward County, I said. There's a farmhouse inn I've thought about for 2 years. He laughed quietly. How long have you had that planned? I didn't plan it, I just noticed it. I pulled back to look at him. I notice things. The meeting happened on a gray Thursday afternoon, the kind of November day Ottawa produces with reliable efficiency. Theodore walked into the private dining room at Rideau Street, looking confident and slightly sorry for me, which was exactly the wrong read of the situation. He made his offer in the first 25 minutes. Specific, explicit, generous, completely incriminating. He named files, named contacts, named the precise structure of what he wanted. The door opened at minute 27. Sebastian walked in, followed by a woman from the OSC's enforcement division and a man from the RCMP's integrated market enforcement team. I'd learned their names during our prep. I'd made sure to remember them. Theodore went pale. Theodore Ashworth, the OSC officer said. We have some questions about a proposal you've made to a member of Vance Capital's staff. She set a recorder on the table. This conversation is being logged. Theodore looked at me. The confidence had collapsed entirely, replaced by something between fury and disbelief. You played me. No, I said. You played yourself, I just took notes. They led him out 20 minutes later. Sebastian stood beside me in the emptied room, both of us looking at the space where Theodore had been. You were extraordinary, he said. I was precise. That's different. He turned to look at me. It isn't, actually. His hand found mine on the table, fingers interlacing. In your case. 3 months later, the Ashworth matter resolved. Theodore pled to a reduced charge. Gordon Ashworth issued a statement through counsel. The threat was closed, and I was no longer Sebastian Vance's executive assistant. I was his partner, in the sense that we had discussed it carefully over 3 evenings in Prince Edward County, with good wine and better honesty, and decided that the simplest description was the accurate one. I'd taken on an independent consulting role, operational strategy for mid-size firms in the capital region, and Sebastian had made a point of telling every relevant person in his circle that the shift had been my idea and my choice, which it had. It wasn't simple. His world wasn't simple. There were competitors who viewed me as a vulnerability, and associates who initially questioned whether I was a liability. There was the ongoing fact of his history, the things he'd told me in full as he'd promised, that I'd had to sit with and decide what I thought about. I thought he was trying. I thought trying was the honest answer to a complicated life, and it was the same answer I was giving, and that made us even. On a Thursday morning in February, the same month he'd remembered the oat milk, 3 years earlier. I let myself into his apartment with the key he'd given me in December, and found him at the kitchen table with coffee and the Globe and Mail and the chess set he played against himself when he was thinking. He looked up. You're early, he said. I'm exactly on time. I set my bag down, 7:14. Something moved across his face, recognition, warmth, something that hadn't been there 3 years ago, and now lived there permanently. "Sit down," he said. "I'll get your coffee, oat milk," I said. "Not cream." "I know," he said simply. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was the beginning of every ordinary morning that came after. The kind of ordinary that's actually extraordinary. If you've spent enough time paying attention to know the difference.